They say marriage is supposed to be a partnership, a steady rhythm of support and affection. But for me, it felt like being gently drowned in sweetness. I used to love that about Xavier, how he was so thoughtful, so present, so committed to doing things right. In the beginning, it was charming, the way he remembered the tiniest details about our relationship, down to the exact song playing the first time we kissed. The way he'd bring me coffee in bed, not just on weekends but every single morning, complete with almond milk and exactly half a teaspoon of sugar, just the way I liked it. It was sweet, it was romantic, it was relentless. By year 8 of our marriage, that same sweetness had curdled into something heavier. He wasn't abusive or neglectful, not even close. He was, in fact, the model husband by all outward appearances, thoughtful, attentive, endlessly giving. Too giving. So giving that, I forgot how to breathe without him asking if I needed help inhaling. I couldn't sneeze without Xavier checking if I wanted tea or a blanket. At first, I brushed it off. I figured it was just his way of showing love, but over time, that love felt like surveillance. Every question about my day became a test. Every Friday date night was a performance, meticulously researched and orchestrated by Xavier, like he was curating a museum of affection, instead of spending time with his wife. I couldn't go to the grocery store without a follow-up quiz. Did you get the oat milk from the organic section, or the standard one? I remember you liked the taste better from the organic section. I'd forgotten I even had an opinion about oat milk. Our life was planned down to the hour. Sunday morning farmer's market, Sunday afternoon meal prep, evening cuddle sessions with a shared TV series I never picked. Xavier always wanted to check in on my mood, my thoughts, my sleep quality. He once kept me up until 1 a.m. because I said I was just tired, and he thought I was hiding something deeper. I wasn't. I was just tired. Of him, though I didn't admit that then. What's strange is, this was the same man who once drove 5 hours just to kiss me goodnight in college, who showed up with takeout and stories of last-minute road trips, who once made me climb onto the roof of a frat house to see the stars. Where did that man go? What replaced him was some kind of human self-help app disguised as a spouse. I felt like I was married to a customer service chatbot that had been programmed to optimize emotional engagement. The spontaneity, the lightness, the laughter, gone, replaced by routines so polished they squeaked. He first showed up at one of our monthly inter-office meetings, the kind that felt like a slow death by PowerPoint. I wasn't expecting anything more than another round of stale coffee and performance metrics, but then I saw him, Michael. He looked like someone who didn't belong in a place that needed permission slips to change printer paper. Hair slightly too long for the office, shirt sleeves rolled up, slouched posture like he'd rather be anywhere else. But it was the way he looked around the room that caught me. Detached, amused, like he was already in on the joke. When the regional manager started monologuing about compliance protocols, I felt a small nudge under the table. I looked down and saw Michael's foot tapping mine. Not in a flirty way, just enough to catch my attention. Then he leaned over and whispered, "Think he practices that speech in the mirror or just wings it?" I laughed. Actually laughed. Not one of those polite little exhales I reserved for Xavier's trivia facts or dad jokes. Real laughter. It startled me. After the meeting, a few of us went for coffee, and Michael and I ended up at the same table. I was quiet at first, still unsure why I felt drawn to someone I'd spoken fewer than 10 words to. But he had this way of asking questions that didn't feel like he was trying to collect data. He asked what I liked to do on weekends. I told him I usually did meal prep and watched documentaries with my husband. He said, "Sounds like a calendar factory exploded." And I laughed again. That became our thing. These strange, stolen moments during otherwise dry meetings. He'd text me memes during presentations or send me sarcastic commentary about new company policies. When I replied, it didn't feel like I was breaking any rules. It felt like I was breathing after holding my breath for years. We started talking more outside of work. Not a lot at first, just the occasional article link or funny observation. But those texts began to matter. They weren't romantic, not explicitly. But there was something in the way he responded. He got me. Not just what I was saying, but what I wasn't saying. When I mentioned feeling like I was living the same day over and over, he didn't offer solutions. He just said, "Yeah, I call that the groundhog marriage effect. He was in a relationship too, apparently. Long-term. Stale, he called it. Comfortable like old socks, which made me laugh and also made me want to cry. We never talked about cheating or crossing lines. Not then. We talked about music, growing up in small towns, why everyone pretends they enjoy kale. We talked like people who hadn't been allowed to talk freely in a long time. I became reckless in small, quiet ways. I kept my phone on silent when Xavier was home, not because I had something to hide, but because I didn't want him peeking over my shoulder and reading texts that would only confuse him. They weren't salacious, but they weren't innocent either. They lived in that charged space between harmless banter and something else. Something waiting. Xavier, of course, noticed the shift. He always did. He asked who I was texting. I told him it was just group chat stuff from work. He smiled, trusting, and went back to marinating chicken for our pre-planned Wednesday dinner. I hated how easily he believed me. I hated how good he was. It made me feel worse. Michael started sending me voice notes. His voice was deeper than I expected. Calmer. Confident in a way that wasn't performative. He wasn't trying to impress me. He just spoke like someone who didn't apologize for his own thoughts. I listened to his voice in the car, in the shower, sometimes on my lunch break in the bathroom stall with the fan running to drown it out. They weren't even emotional notes, just musings, stories, things he found ridiculous or fascinating. But I clung to them like lifelines. I hadn't realized how starved I was for spontaneity until someone dropped it into my life in audio format. It wasn't long before we were making up reasons to see each other. We started volunteering for projects that involved both our locations. We stayed after meetings to wrap things up. The truth is, I just wanted to exist near someone who didn't need me to be grateful for being loved, who didn't ask me about my energy levels or the symbolism in last night's dream, who didn't plan love like a mission briefing. The first time we met up outside of work, it was unplanned. Or at least we told ourselves that. A few people from both offices were going out for drinks after a conference, and one by one, they bailed until it was just the two of us. I told myself it was fate. Or maybe I just wanted to believe I hadn't engineered it. We sat at the bar for 3 hours, talking about everything and nothing. He asked what I would do if no one was watching. I told him I didn't even know anymore. He said that's the saddest thing I've ever heard. And it was, because it was true. When we hugged goodbye, it lasted too long. Not scandalously so, but longer than coworkers hug. I felt the buzz of his hand just grazing the small of my back. I knew with sickening clarity that this was going somewhere. And I didn't stop it. I didn't want to. That night, Xavier was already asleep when I got home. There was a post-it note on the fridge. Made you your favorite, rosemary pasta. It's in the microwave. Love you. I stared at it for a long time. I stood there barefoot in the kitchen, holding that little yellow square like it was radioactive. My stomach twisted, but not with guilt, with resentment. I didn't want rosemary pasta. I wanted someone to ask me what I wanted before deciding what was best for me. Michael and I didn't kiss that night. Not yet. But something had already happened. A door had opened, and I walked right through it. And I know how this sounds. Believe me, I do. Who complains about a husband who remembers anniversaries and makes dinner reservations without being asked? But when love becomes a project, when every moment feels pre-scripted and monitored, it stops feeling like love. It starts feeling like captivity. I didn't want Xavier to stop caring. I just wanted him to care like a person, not like a life coach who'd read too many relationship manuals. I remember once we were out to dinner at this charming French place he'd found through an influencer he followed. He'd called ahead to request a table by the window, had the sommelier pick a wine I liked, and even arranged for the waiter to bring out a slice of cake with "Happy First Netflix Night" written on the plate in chocolate. That was the night we had watched our first show together 6 years ago. He remembered that. Down to the show, down to the weather that night. And I sat there, smiling politely, while inside I was screaming, not because it wasn't lovely. It was, but because I couldn't even remember what I wanted out of life anymore beyond being the recipient of someone else's script. I tried to talk to him about it, gently at first. I told him I missed the old days, the chaos, the lack of planning. He listened, He nodded. He even suggested we try being less structured. But that just meant he planned spontaneous moments. He'd schedule unstructured evenings on our shared calendar, complete with emoji placeholders and backup dinner plans in case we wanted to wing it. I felt like I was losing my mind. There were nights I stared at the ceiling while Xavier slept peacefully beside me, his arm draped over me like a seatbelt. I'd listen to the steady rhythm of his breathing and wonder if this was it. If this was what forever looked like, predictable, polite, perfectly curated monotony. I wasn't unhappy in the dramatic sense. I wasn't crying myself to sleep or fighting with him every night. It was quieter than that, like slowly realizing the air in the room has been thinning, and one day, you notice you're barely breathing at all. I started seeking silence. I'd go to the bathroom just to sit on the edge of the tub and scroll through memes on my phone. I'd linger longer at work, offering to clean out storage rooms or organize files just to avoid going home. And when I was home, I'd pretend to be asleep so I wouldn't have to answer Xavier's questions about my mood, my energy level, or my internal emotional climate, as he once called it. I didn't want to cheat. I need to make that clear. I wasn't some sex-starved housewife out trolling for attention. I just wanted to be alone in my own head again. To have a thought that wasn't immediately intercepted by someone asking me how I felt about that thought. I wanted space to want again, to miss someone, to be missed, to long for something, instead of being permanently submerged in someone else's definition of love. There was no explosive fight, no betrayal, no dramatic turning point. Just an endless stretch of well-intentioned gestures that eventually became unbearable. Love shouldn't feel like being managed. But that's what it had become with Xavier. I was a project he was always optimizing. He never stopped trying to be a better husband. And somewhere along the way, I stopped wanting to be his wife. It started, if I'm being honest, long before we ever touched. The affair wasn't a single moment of betrayal. It was a slow, almost invisible unraveling. 1,000 tiny threads pulled loose, until one day there was simply nothing left to hold together. By the time I ended up in a hotel room with Michael, I wasn't falling. I had already fallen. The physical part was just the last thing to catch up. We were sent to the same out-of-town conference, a dreary, beige-colored corporate getaway masquerading as professional development. Xavier had encouraged me to go, even packed my travel toiletries in a labeled Ziploc, complete with Post-its reminding me which night cream went with which serum. I'd kissed him goodbye on the cheek, and he'd said, "Go learn something exciting." He had no idea how literal that would become. The day sessions were forgettable. We took notes we didn't need and laughed at the empty buzzwords thrown around by people who'd long stopped caring. But when the sessions ended and the hotel bar lights dimmed, everything sharpened. The others filtered out early, one by one, citing early flights or emails to catch up on. Soon, it was just Michael and me. 2 drinks in, talking like the world was ending and we'd been waiting for this moment our whole lives. We weren't flirting, not exactly. We were confessing. He told me how his girlfriend made every decision in their life together, how she planned out their meals, their budget, even their intimacy schedule. He didn't sound bitter, just exhausted. I told him about Xavier's endless sweetness, his prepackaged affection, his scheduled spontaneity that made me feel more like a pet than a partner. And Michael listened. Not to fix me, just to know me. And then, somewhere between a half laugh and a pause too long, it happened. No fireworks, no music swelling, just silence. He touched my hand and I didn't pull away. In that stillness, I remembered who I used to be. The version of me before marriage turned me into someone always managing someone else's emotions. The version of me who once danced in the rain just because the weather was warm. The hotel room was just upstairs. We didn't plan to go there, but neither of us asked what came next. We knew. And when the door shut behind us, I felt more awake than I had in years. I won't romanticize it. That night wasn't perfect. It was messy, clumsy even, like we were both shaking the dust off parts of ourselves that hadn't been touched in too long. But it was real. And I hadn't felt real in so long. He didn't ask me to rate the experience. He didn't analyze my expressions. He just saw me. Not as a role or a responsibility, but as a woman who still had a pulse. Afterwards, we lay in bed, not speaking. There was no need. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. Xavier, of course. A photo of our cat curled up in my absence, captioned, "We miss you." I turned the phone face down without replying. What followed wasn't some dramatic spiral. It was more like an awakening. I came home and Xavier greeted me with flowers and a homemade spinach quiche. I kissed him back, smiled, even thanked him with more sincerity than usual. I think he thought I had a really great conference. In a way, I had. In the days and weeks that followed, something strange happened. I became a better wife. At least on the surface. I was more patient, more affectionate, more engaged. I laughed at Xavier's jokes. I offered to cook. I even initiated sex, which he hadn't seen in months. He was thrilled. He thought he was finally doing everything right. But he didn't know that the warmth I showed him was borrowed from somewhere else. That my smile had been lit by a fire Xavier didn't spark. With Michael, I had permission to be unfiltered, unmonitored, imperfect. With Xavier, I became the woman I thought he wanted, now that I had somewhere else to let my real self out to breathe. Michael and I kept seeing each other. Lunches, coffee dates, the occasional night when our partners were both out or otherwise occupied. We talked constantly, texted during meetings, sent each other playlists and snippets of favorite books. It wasn't just about sex anymore, if it ever was. It was a relationship, a real one, only buried under layers of secrecy and guilt. But that's the thing. I didn't feel guilty. Not the way I was supposed to. I felt guilty for not feeling guilty. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but for once, I didn't feel like I was dying inside. For once, someone looked at me like I was a person and not a performance. There was a night, maybe 2 months in, when Michael brought takeout to my car during a rainstorm. We sat there in the parking lot, chopsticks in hand, laughing like teenagers. He reached over and tucked a damp strand of hair behind my ear and said, "You're the easiest person I've ever talked to." And my heart did something strange. It twisted, not with desire, but with grief. Because I realized Xavier used to say the same thing once. Back before the performance began. Back home, Xavier was becoming someone new too, more relaxed, less suffocating. He stopped asking for phone updates, stopped hovering over every emotional hiccup. He started making plans with friends again, started suggesting I take more time for myself. I thought he was finally loosening the grip, finally trusting that I didn't need to be micromanaged. I mistook his detachment for growth. I didn't know he'd already started doubting everything. The night Xavier surprised me with a new dress, something slinky and red that he said looked like me. I nearly broke. Not because I didn't like the gift, but because it made me realize he still believed in us. And that made everything harder. I went to the bathroom and cried, silently, pressing toilet paper under my eyes so he wouldn't notice the redness later. I didn't know if I was mourning what we'd lost or fearing what I was about to destroy. But the truth was simple. I needed Michael. Not just his attention or his body, but the mirror he held up to me, showing a reflection I'd almost forgotten. The version of me that didn't belong to anyone. The affair didn't feel like a betrayal in the beginning. It felt like reclamation, like remembering the taste of your own voice after years of whispering. I convinced myself I was managing it well, balancing both lives with precision. I thought I had control. I didn't realize how naive that was. I thought I was winning. I thought I'd pulled off the impossible trick. 2 lives stitched side by side without a single thread crossing. During the day, I was Ariana, the affectionate wife who smiled more, laughed easier, and even started suggesting new shows for our Netflix lineup. At night, or sometimes mid-afternoon in parked cars or carefully chosen apartments, I was Ariana, the woman Michael couldn't stop touching, couldn't stop texting, couldn't stop imagining in some alternate reality where we both walked away from our current lives. But here's the thing about juggling. It only looks graceful until one hand starts tightening into a fist. Xavier had changed. I noticed it before I understood it. It started with the quiet. He didn't ask about my meetings anymore. He didn't notice when I skipped the farmer's market or came home an hour late from the clinic. At first, I thought it was progress. Growth. I even praised him for it. "Thanks for giving me some space lately," I told him one night. As we curled up under a blanket he had folded exactly the way I liked. He smiled, kissed my forehead and said, "Of course, I trust you." That sentence should have shattered me. But I believed him. Or maybe I needed to. I didn't realize then that silence can be surveillance dressed as surrender. In reality, Xavier was already working against me, and he wasn't doing it out of rage or desperation. He was doing it with precision. Somewhere between week 6 and week 10 of the affair, while I was carefully deleting texts and muting notifications, Xavier was tracking. Not in the dramatic, movie stalker way, but in the quiet, insidious way of someone who knew me better than I thought he did. He installed a location tracker under the guise of our shared Find My Family app. He noted my car's mileage. He compared the odometer to how long it should have taken to drive to the clinic and back. He began logging the discrepancies. I didn't see it because I wasn't looking. I assumed his confidence was trust. I didn't know it was preparation. He stopped asking for proof because he was already collecting his own. He let me dig the hole while he measured it. Meanwhile, I was growing more reckless, more sure of myself. Michael and I started meeting outside of our safe zones. We took longer lunches, riskier nights. I told Xavier I was meeting a friend from high school, someone he didn't know well, and spent 3 hours in Michael's apartment instead, curled up on a secondhand couch talking about childhood dreams and sex and why we still believed in fate. I felt invincible. Michael made me feel like I was 20 again. I could walk into a room with him and the air would change. I could say something mundane and he'd make it feel profound. It was everything I'd convinced myself I needed. Laughter, spontaneity, the right kind of silence, the kind that doesn't beg for emotional inventory. Xavier, meanwhile, was building his portfolio. He never once lost his temper, never confronted me, never asked pointed questions. Instead, he made me feel like I was finally being trusted. I leaned into it, even started thanking him for letting me be myself. I talked more openly about needing independence, and he nodded with that same placid, almost eerie calm. He told me I was right, that maybe we both needed more autonomy, that we'd become too wrapped up in the routine. He was letting go, piece by piece. And I thought it was for my sake. I didn't realize he was cutting the ties so cleanly because he didn't want to make a mess when he finally walked away. Then came the night I found him in the kitchen, staring at his laptop. He quickly shut the screen when I walked in. My stomach did a tiny flip, but I smoothed it over with a joke. "Don't worry, I didn't see your secret Pinterest board," I teased. He smiled too easily. "Just looking at vacation spots," he said. "Thought we could use a getaway." It should have tipped me off. Xavier hated traveling. He hated airports, hated humidity, hated hotels that didn't have predictable continental breakfasts. But I let it slide, because I wanted to believe that our roles had reversed, that maybe now he was the one trying harder, chasing me, waking up to how predictable he'd become. I thought I'd cracked the code of our marriage. A little distance, a little mystery, and suddenly we were flirting again, touching more. I even considered slowing things down with Michael, but I didn't. I couldn't. By now, Michael was more than a fling. He was the part of my life that felt alive. He didn't make me feel like a problem to be solved or a routine to be managed. With him, I wasn't Ariana, wife and emotional barometer. I was just me. Flawed, funny, impulsive, human. We started talking about maybe taking a trip together. Just us. Somewhere quiet. Maybe out west, where no one knew our names and hotel staff wouldn't blink at an unmarried couple checking in without luggage. I wanted that trip. I wanted it more than I'd wanted anything in a long time. And then Xavier surprised me. He brought home flowers again. Not the ones I said I liked, but the ones I actually liked. Peonies, not roses. He booked a massage for me without asking. Ordered takeout from the tiny Korean place across town I once mentioned offhand in year 3 of our marriage. He kissed my neck while I was doing dishes and whispered, "You've been amazing lately. Thank you." I froze, because for the first time in weeks I felt seen in the wrong way. Not adored, not appreciated, but monitored. He'd been studying me, not in the usual suffocating way, in the quiet, forensic way of someone collecting data for court. That night, as I watched him sleep, his arm flung over the comforter like he had not a care in the world, I felt something in my chest turn cold. A knot forming, a certainty rising. He knew, he had to know. But he wasn't asking, he wasn't accusing, he was waiting. I checked my phone in the bathroom, heart pounding. Michael had sent a picture of a cabin in the mountains. "Just found this," he wrote. "No cell reception, lots of trees, one giant fireplace. You in?" I stared at the image for a long time. The trees looked like they were holding their breath. So was I. The day the ground fell out from under me was a Tuesday. I remember that because Tuesdays were usually the least remarkable days of the week. Mondays carried the chaos, Wednesdays the fatigue, but Tuesdays just passed. And yet that Tuesday became the turning point, the day every lie I had carefully sculpted turned to dust in my hands. I had just come back from lunch. Not clinic lunch, not coworker lunch. Michael lunch. We'd spent an hour tucked into a corner booth at a Vietnamese place on the other side of town, talking about everything and nothing. We'd laughed over our foe, played footsie under the table like kids, and mapped out what a weekend away could look like. Somewhere off the grid. Somewhere we could pretend, even if just for 48 hours, that this wasn't a ticking time bomb. I returned to work light-footed, my head full of the way Michael had kissed my palm before I left. I was humming to myself, logging into my workstation, when a woman in a navy blazer and neat black heels walked in like she owned the building. She looked around the waiting room, found me with her eyes, and asked, "Ariana Vele?" I nodded. She handed me an envelope with a flat, practiced smile. "You've been served," she said, and then turned and walked away like she hadn't just detonated my life. I stood frozen. The clinic around me carried on, phones ringing, patients flipping through outdated magazines, someone asking for a refill at the front desk. I took the envelope into the break room and shut the door behind me. The moment I opened it, I knew. It wasn't just divorce papers. It was an exhibition. A performance curated by someone who'd spent months preparing for this moment. Every accusation had a receipt. There were printed screenshots of text messages between Michael and me, dates, times, locations, photos of us at restaurants, in Michael's car, even grainy hotel parking lot stills from what must have been security footage. He'd documented everything. And then, like a magician revealing the trick, he laid it bare in one perfect packet. There was even a timeline. Month by month, Xavier had written notes, where I said I'd been, where I actually went. The mileage discrepancies, the text log activity, the sudden change in my behavior and how it correlated with each of my lunch meetings and girls' nights. It was horrifying in its completeness. Not because it was wrong, but because it was right. I ran to the bathroom and threw up in the sink. The sour bile coated the back of my throat as I gripped the cold porcelain and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My face looked pale, wrong, older. I called Xavier from the parking lot, fingers trembling. Straight to voicemail. A calm male voice I didn't recognize replaced his familiar tone. "All communication must now go through my legal representative. Contact information is provided in the filing." He hadn't just left me. He'd vanished. I sped home, heart in my throat. Our street looked the same. Our lawn was trimmed. The recycling bin was still at the curb. But when I opened the front door, the silence told me everything. The house wasn't empty. It was hollow, like the ghost of a home. His closet was cleared, every hanger bare. The drawer where he kept his watch collection, vacant. The bathroom shelves, once overflowing with his meticulous grooming products, were empty but for my clutter. His toothbrush, gone. His towel, gone. Even his coffee mug, the chipped blue one he refused to part with, was gone. Not broken, not left behind, removed with precision, like he'd never existed. There was no note, no goodbye, just the filing and an email in my inbox from his lawyer marked "Response requested within 5 business days." I collapsed onto the couch, heart racing. How had he done it? How had he disappeared so cleanly? I'd lived with this man for nearly a decade. I thought I knew every angle of him. But the Xavier who had cried during Pixar movies, who once spent 3 days making me a scrapbook for our 5th anniversary, he had transformed into someone else. Someone surgical, someone who knew exactly how to disappear without leaving debris. I did the only thing I could think of. I called Michael. He didn't pick up. I texted him, "Call me now, please." 20 minutes passed before the screen lit up. I answered on the first ring, already pacing the kitchen floor. "Michael." I started, but he cut me off. "What the hell did you do?" His voice wasn't angry, it was furious, a low, shaking growl I'd never heard before. "She got everything," he spat. "All of it, texts, photos, stuff from your house. What were you thinking?" My heart sank. I didn't know. I didn't know he was watching. Well, he was, and now she knows. She knows everything. I tried to explain, to steady the conversation, but he wasn't having it. "I have to deal with this," he said. "I can't talk to you right now." He hung up. That was the moment the second shoe dropped. Not just the collapse of my marriage, but the crumbling of the fantasy I'd built with Michael. I sat on the floor, phone still clutched in my hand, surrounded by silence. That afternoon I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stopped. The fallout happened faster than I expected. Within days, friends started calling, or rather, stopped calling. My sister sent me a single-line text. "Got a package. Guess you won't be at Thanksgiving." The girls from work, once eager to gossip over lunch, suddenly avoided eye contact. I became radioactive. No one wanted to ask, but they didn't need to. Xavier had made sure they already knew.